things that I understand that you focused on recently is having open APIs. And I wonder if you can talk about the impact of that kind of infrastructure on the ability of other fintech companies, especially startups, to scale and innovate more quickly.
Yes, we have a slide or two on that. The APIs, we've provided an extensive set of APIs that we make available in a Sandbox, fully automated environment where you can come as a potential Galileo client and discover the capabilities that are there, and we've had a number of really interesting experiences lately where you don't need to have a formal relationship with Galileo, and we've seen worldwide interest in our APIs and powering very, very creative products.
Can you go into the Sandbox just a little bit more and how that works?
The Sandbox is an environment where developers can come and they can self-authenticate, they can log in, they can administer groups. You can actually see through a content managed delivery system, you can see the APIs, the various responses, the various requests. We actually create code fragments based on the keys that are needed to go out and execute particular methods. So if you're running in, let's say, Python, you can actually grab that section of code, drop it in, and execute it. So in a matter of minutes, you can compress down, what used to be 36 months in many cases, down to about 5 minutes on the Sandbox. It's interesting in the world of payments in general, banking and payments, and now financial technology companies, is that fraud is probably the leading indicator as to whether or not you can have a profitable program. And this is an area where Galileo is just absolutely, truly excelling. We have about 100 million accounts on our platform that we've issued. And I'll tell you a couple of things that we've done here. One is a product called our Dynamic Fraud Engine. This is actually a rules-based engine, and what you see, that spike right there at 9.8 basis points of loss in June, those occur because merchants are being compromised. And then we deployed our Dynamic Fraud Engine right there and drove that. What you see in the blue is lost dollars against settled dollars. Drove that down to about 1 basis point, but that's essentially an 80% reduction to Visa's published number across the entire platform. So operating at 80% reduction, and certainly 1 basis point, is dramatically different than nearly 10 basis points. On this particular portfolio, every basis point changes the size of the jet the guy flies. That's how massive this is. So, but this is essentially a real-time capability that we have that allows us to inject rules into the auth stream that create very effective defenses against fraud. But this is rules-based, and you asked specifically about AI. AI is difficult to find and to locate. Here, we're looking at about 550 attributes of the transaction. We decision on that in about 1/10 of a second. And here you can see the way that you typically measure AIs here is a traditional confusion matrix. So good conditions on the left, false conditions or fraud on the right. And this is what we see. So you get two relative numbers out of here. One is precision, the other is recall. These are important for judging how effective the AI is. And the entire financial world operates at about a precision of 0.25. And this is one of those experiences that we've all gone through. So if I live in Utah, I go to California, and I'm downstairs or down in California, Los Angeles, let's say, swiping. We're in California, I recognize that now. Swiping away with my family at Disneyland, and my issuer calls, and like, Clay, is that really you? What 0.25 means is that there's 1 transaction that's fraud and 3 that are Clay Wilkes. Right? But at 0.90, there's 10 phone calls that issuer has to make. 9 of them are fraud, and 1 of them is actually Clay Wilkes.
So since we have an audience of other fintech people, maybe you can talk about some sort of blue sky. What is, in 10, 20, 30 years, what is the industry going to look like? What do you expect to change, and what do you expect to stay the same?
We see this change of fintech continuing to accelerate, actually. You all are in a great position right now of being able to define really creative markets and opportunities within those markets. And we see an accelerating change really globally. I think fintech is one of the most exciting things that I can possibly think of. 30 years is really hard for me to look forward to, but I can look forward to 3 years. And in 3 years, many of the companies that are seated here are going to be global household names.
So, since there are a fair few entrepreneurs and startup employees in the audience, can you sort of rewind back to when you started Galileo? What were some of the struggles that you had to deal with early in the life of the company?
That's a great question. You know, it's interesting. There's tons of money, especially in fintech, for any good idea. So that's great. We didn't have that advantage. But really, you know, what's your idea? How are you going to differentiate? Where are you going to get the people? And in San Francisco, that's tough. How are you going to build? And how are you going to get noticed in a crowded world? So it takes creativity and creative thinking to be able to crack into that. But I look back on the Galileo experience. I mean, Galileo for me personally was a second experience. So I'd already taken a company public. I retired when I was 34, and I'd been retired for 6 years before starting it.
And then you unretired?
Then my wife said, "Why don't you go set an example for your kids?" So that's why I'm doing Galileo. As I look through it, the investment, you know, that has to go into it, the people, just the long days, sweat and differentiation. Those are tricky for entrepreneurs, and I admire anybody who's in that seat.
So speaking of face-to-face contact, I think one of the things that new companies often struggle with is sales, and especially landing those key clients that really help you grow as a company and learn without being so much of your revenue that you're then sort of captured by that one client. Again, sort of rewinding to the early days of Galileo, but also based on your decades of experience, how do you go about striking that balance, especially as a smaller, newer company?
I think for the smaller, newer companies, I think about Apple and you know, by the way, I'm an Apple fan, and if I don't buy an Apple iPhone, Apple's going nowhere, right? So they're going to still be the same great company they are today. And if the fintech companies focus on that rather than sort of landing the big deal, then they don't have that concentration risk. So that's one thing. If your business model is built around, I've got to go out and actually close that big deal, then you're looking for a way to differentiate yourself, set yourself apart, and make that happen. And it's not easy. I mean, but having a strategic vision is the thing that really enables that to happen, in my judgment, at least in the world that we're operating in.